Jackson Cole had built his company, Cole Tech, from the ground up, a man in his late 50s. He prided himself on his old-school business tactics, cutthroat deals, backroom negotiations, and a ruthless approach to hiring and firing. What he didn't realize, or rather refused to acknowledge, was that his deep-seated prejudices were slowly eroding the empire he had spent decades constructing. One Monday morning, Jackson walked into his downtown office, ready for another day of making money. He sipped his overpriced coffee as he scanned the room. His employees were already at work, their heads buried in their screens, making calls and pushing papers. But one person stood out, Michael Grant, a charismatic, sharply dressed black man who had joined the company only a month ago. Michael had an aura about him. He carried himself with quiet confidence, and his sharp business acumen had already landed Cole Tech several promising leads. The employees respected him, and clients seemed to gravitate toward him. But Jackson? He didn't like him. Jackson had grown up believing that power belonged to men like him, white, wealthy, and in control. The sight of Michael, a black man, commanding such attention and respect in his company rubbed him the wrong way. And though Michael had done nothing wrong, Jackson had already made up his mind about him. The setup. Michael had been working on a major deal with Titan Corp, a billion-dollar conglomerate that specialized in tech acquisitions. If the deal went through, Cole Tech would receive a multi-million-dollar contract that could catapult the company into the big leagues. Titan Corp CEO Charles Reynolds was notoriously hard to impress, but Michael had built a solid rapport with him. On the day of the final meeting, Michael was set to present the deal to Titan Corp's board. Everything was in place. The numbers checked out, the market projections were airtight, and the proposal was nearly impossible to refuse. But just hours before the presentation, Jackson made a decision that would seal his fate. He walked into the office and called Michael into his office. "I don't think this is working out," Jackson said, leaning back in his chair. Michael frowned. "Excuse me? I don't think you're a good fit for Cole Tech," Jackson said, his voice dripping with condescension. "We appreciate what you've done, but I'm letting you go." Michael stared at him, momentarily stunned. "I've led this deal from day one. I built the relationship with Titan Corp. You're firing me now, hours before the biggest meeting of the year." Jackson shrugged. "It's not personal, just business." Michael studied him for a long moment, then chuckled. He had dealt with men like Jackson before, men who saw his success as a threat rather than an asset. He could have fought back, but he knew something Jackson didn't. So instead, he simply stood up, straightened his tie, and said, "You'll regret this." And with that, he walked out of the office. The fallout. Jackson was feeling smug. He had put Michael in his place. The deal will go through just fine without him, he thought. He'd take the lead in the meeting himself. After all, he was the CEO. Who better to close the deal than me? 2 hours later, Jackson arrived at the Titan Corp headquarters, ready to charm a board. He confidently walked into the conference room, expecting a warm welcome, but the atmosphere was icy. Charles Reynolds sat at the head of the table, arms crossed. He didn't even offer Jackson a handshake. "Where's Michael?" Charles asked, his tone sharp. Jackson forced a smile. "Michael is no longer with Cole Tech. But don't worry, I'll be handling the deal personally." Silence. Charles leaned forward. "You fired Michael?" Jackson cleared his throat. It was a business decision. Charles exchanged glances with his executives, then slowly shook his head. "Well, that was a mistake." Jackson felt a flicker of unease. "Excuse me?" Charles exhaled, then leaned back in his chair. "Michael wasn't just some employee. He's a close friend. We've been doing business together for years. When I told him I was considering your company for this deal, it wasn't just because of the numbers. It was because of him. I trust him. And if you don't see his value, then you don't deserve this deal." Jackson's stomach dropped. "Now hold on a second." But Charles had already stood up. "We're done here." And just like that, the deal was dead. The inevitable downfall. News spread fast in the industry. Titan Corp pulling out of the deal sent ripples through the business world, and soon other clients began to reconsider their partnerships with Cole Tech. Investors got nervous, stocks dipped, and employees started quitting. Meanwhile, Michael Grant had the last laugh. After leaving Cole Tech, He received multiple offers from major companies, including Titan Corp. Within weeks, he had joined their executive board as senior vice president. As for Jackson, his company never recovered. Within a year, Coltech filed for bankruptcy. In the end, his prejudice had cost him everything. Michael had been right. He did regret it,